I think it's important to understand the value of enemies. Enemies are to be cherished, they're to be cultivated. It's convenient to have someone to blame for your leadership failures.
위대한 수령 김일성님께서는 우리나라의 정세는 위험이 전개하고 긴장합니다. 미색주의자는 침략 행동을 계속 강화하고 있으며 그들이 새 전쟁 범하는 것은 더욱더 도골화되어 가고 있습니다. 라고 가르치셨습니다.
For Kim, having the constant threat of war with America was useful in controlling his people. Any sign that America was threatening North Korea was helpful in making him their protector. So when a U.S. spy ship was seen off the coast, it was an opportunity for Kim to define himself in the eyes of his people.
처음에 접근했을 때 저감에서는 깃발을 올리는 거 보니까 미국 깃발을 올렸습니다. 그래서 정말 이때 미국 깃발을 볼 때 나의 눈에서는 정말 중앙에 불이 있었고 적들에게 정말 당장 달려가서 정말 가슴 찢어서 물에 잡아놓고 싶었습니다. 정말. 그러나 저는 실제 이때 우리 민이 100여 년 전부터 정말 미제 침략자들은 우리 민을 침략한 침략자고 이런 원수놈들입니다.
First shots were aimed at the bridge, shattering glass and raking the ship back and forth with machine gun fire. The Puebla was an intelligence collection ship to pick up electronic surveillance in Russia and North Korea, but we were unarmed, totally unarmed. They started shooting their bigger shells at us that came right through the side of the ship and just blew us up. They just literally lifted me up and blew me down the hall. And that's what it took off the bottom of my scrotum and went into my upper leg. Eventually, when the Koreans came on board the ship, they tied us up and blindfolded us. And matter of fact, they kicked me in my wound.
Kim had captured a U.S. Navy vessel and had taken 82 Americans prisoner. In the middle of the night, the President of the United States was informed.
What's your speculation on what happened to us?
Mr. President, I honestly don't know, and I think we need a Cuban Missile Crisis approach to this. We ought to get locked in a room, and you ought to keep us there, insist we stay there until we come up with answers to 3 questions. What was the Korean objective? Secondly, what are they going to do now? Blackmail us, let it go, you know, what? And thirdly, what should we do now?
President Johnson is at the head of the table, his back to us. And that is I, Tom Johnson, taking the notes. The President. What I want to know is how do we get the ship and the boys back? Clark Clifford. I think the President must proceed on the basis of probabilities and not possibilities. I think the North Koreans are engaged in harassments. Our moral posture would be better if the North Koreans moved first. I am deeply sorry about the ship and about the 83 men, but I do not think it is worth a resumption of the Korean War. There was deep concern that however the United States reacted militarily could trigger another large-scale war. And the United States, to be honest, was not prepared for another large war when we already had a very, very serious war going in Vietnam. And that was something President Johnson wanted to avoid at almost all costs.
For the first 40 days, I don't think they knew what they were going to do with us, whether they were going to keep us alive. I think they fully were as surprised as we were that there was no retaliation. We fully expected retaliation, and we knew we might not make it. Obviously, no one likes the idea of dying. However, we really wanted some help, and it just didn't come.
Kim Il-sung used the capture of the Pueblo as a propaganda triumph.
We never saw him, he never came by, but we're very aware from the very beginning of Kim Il-sung. Actually, you never just said Kim Il-sung. It would be always preceded or followed by these long eulogies of praise. I just memorized one of them for the hell of it. Peerless patriot, ever victorious, iron-willed, genius commander, and one of the outstanding international and working class movement leaders, Marshal Kim Il-sung. It had to be said with reverence. Actually, we had talked about if he came by, we'd try to jump him and see if we could use him as a hostage to get out of there.
Kim paraded the captured Americans in front of the cameras and forced them to confess to having been in Korean waters.
The crew unanimously admitted the fact that they had intruded deep into our territorial waters and conducted espionage on 17 occasions and signed a joint apology to the DPRK government.
To my mind, it was the deepest intrusion I had ever made into the waters of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
With 82 Americans in captivity, the U.S. government signed a statement of apology prepared by the North Koreans, and so avoided another Korean War.
The U.S. representative was so confused that he even forgot to write a data in the apology.
All of a sudden, the beatings just stopped. Everyone that had visible bruises and things like that were doctored up a bit for a trip down to Pyongyang. Turned us loose.
Here at the Bridge of No Return, the members of the Pueblo are returning to U.S. custody. The transfer is taking place just 11 months to the day after the Pueblo was captured off Wonsan Harbor. When they reached the free side of the bridge, they began to relax a little, perhaps finally comprehending that the idea and dream of being home for Christmas was all but a reality.
To this day, the USS Pueblo sits in North Korean waters, a trophy for the Kims. And for his people, further evidence that the first Kim could do no wrong. 50 years later, his grandson is keeping the myth alive.
Kim Jong-un in particular is very strategic about what he wears. Often he'll wear, say, a hat and clothes that are identical to an outfit that his grandfather wore. That's a way that Kim Jong-un piggybacks on his grandfather's legacy to legitimize his role as the leader. This is meant to refer back to a certain period in North Korean history. North Koreans are going to remember that. They're going to see that and say, ah, he's just like his grandfather.
In the late 1960s, his grandfather was developing a taste for brinkmanship with the United States. But his next move would take him and his country to the limit. In the 1970s, the world changed. President Nixon went to China to meet Chairman Mao.
There is no reason for us to be enemies.
And he traveled to the Soviet Union to make deals with Brezhnev. All of which was bad news for Kim Il-sung. He'd been relying on his fellow communist leaders for backup in his battles with America. However, if he was feeling less support, at first he didn't show it, as he continued to attack his enemies.
The defendant, 22-year-old Moon Se-kwang, admitted he attempted to kill South Korean President Park Chung-hee, but had not intended killing Madam Park. He said he acted under orders from North Korean communist agents in Japan.
Then, in 1976, the fate of North Korea hung in the balance. It came down to an event in the demilitarized zone, an event that centered around a single tree.
The demilitarized zone between the two Koreas is one of the world's great artificial ideological fault lines. Here, the great plates of the capitalist and communist worlds press and chafe against each other. It's a place of suspicion, bristling with mutual threat and mutual fear.
It was a poplar tree, which are usually very slender and don't sprawl, but this tree was a sprawling poplar. It obscured the visibility between two observation posts. So the soldiers had brought it to my attention. I said, well, we'll need to send a work party to go up there and trim the lower branches of the tree.
Little did they know that the North Koreans believed that this tree had been planted by their leader, Kim Il-sung.
Here's the scene. The UN command force began their trimming work on the tree. The North Koreans arrived now. After first saying it was all right to trim it, some 20 minutes later they ordered the work to be halted. As fate would have it, the Americans are in white hats, the North Koreans in the dark ones. According to witnesses, a North Korean army officer yelled "kill," and 30 or so North Korean soldiers grabbed axe handles and started hitting the Americans and their workers. And suddenly, less than 5 minutes after it all began, it's over. Left behind the body of one of the dead American officers. The other is in the bushes here by the tree.
From the moment the incident occurred, I received a call from my commander-in-chief, General Stilwell, and he told me, you know, we will have to take some sort of action. It went everywhere from nuke them to run a couple of divisions up there, wipe them out, you know, you name it. The whole gamut of military options. I said, my alternative would be that we form a task force and we go up there and we cut the tree down completely and we leave it there for them to see. And he said immediately, I agree.
The mission was called Operation Paul Bunyan, named after the larger-than-life folk hero.
With my double-blade axe and my hobnail boots, I go where the timber's tall. When there's work to be done, don't mess around, just sing right up or call.
Bunyan was immortalized in a classic 1950s cartoon as a symbol of old-fashioned American strength.
Right up or call. Hey, Paul, I'm coming, boys.
No one would be able to stop Paul Bunyan chopping down a tree.
Good evening. Circling over a poplar tree in the zone between the two Koreas were 26 armed helicopters, an unknown number of Phantom jets, F-111s, and 3 B-52s flying protection for 300 American and South Korean soldiers who were cutting the tree down.
The aircraft carrier Midway cruised off the Korean coast today in response to the murder of 2 American officers in the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea.
The Midway and its planes will augment 2 U.S. Air Force fighter squadrons already sent to Korea from Okinawa and Idaho.
We assembled the largest combined military operation since the end of the Korean War. Every soldier with a gun pointed into North Korea.
President Ford's new secretary, Ron Nessen, said the president himself approved the plan to go in there and cut down the tree. The North Koreans called President Ford a boss of war.
I was on the ground going to cut down a tree, but all of this was backing me up. The North Koreans knew the ships were off the coast. They knew the bombers were above them. They could tell that. They could surveil that.
Well, let's anticipate our discretion, okay?
It was a tinderbox. Any spark could set it off. As far as I was concerned, it was the last day I'd be alive on this earth. We used chainsaws to cut down the tree. We just let it fall where it may, with no regard, just a ragged stump there. Mission complete. I'm sure the magnitude of the force played a large measure in their deciding it was not a good idea to respond.
North Korea has expressed regret over the killing of 2 American Army officers in the demilitarized zone last Wednesday. However, the regret was expressed in passing in a statement that implied that the United States provoked the incident.
The North Koreans backed down.
The United States didn't want to go to war over this incident. Neither did China or Russia. And they made it clear to Kim that he was not going to be backed up, and they said, you better apologize. And this was the first instance in the entire time that Kim has been leading North Korea that he ever apologized for anything.
Then taking self-defensive measures.
The tree-cutting incident showed that even Kim Il-sung had his limits. When faced with the threat of overwhelming force, he stepped back from the brink. For other world leaders, such a public climb down might have been a problem, but not for him. By now, it made no difference to how his people felt about him. His social control and his son's propaganda were giving him complete control of his people's minds.
김일성은 북한에서 신이고 보통 사람이 아니다. 눈물이 나고 가슴이 벅차오르고 이건 북한 모든 사람들이 당시 그랬습니다.
As Kim Il-sung aged and saw time as shortening, they increasingly became preoccupied with getting a nuclear program.
His son, who had given his father godlike status, was beginning to have designs on becoming leader himself.
It's always difficult to succeed a great father, but it's almost impossible to step into the shoes of God.